Hi everybody, it's Jennifer here. As you can see, I'm actually in my classroom. We teachers went back today. Kids come back next week. So thought I'd videotape here because it's quiet for right now. Okay, let's get to these two essays. There was a lot in both of these essays this week. A lot of interesting information and concepts that to me were a little bit difficult for me to perhaps use with middle school students, but I still have some ideas of maybe how I can incorporate what I read into perhaps exercises or lessons to help the students. Let's talk about Minding My Own Business with Deb Margolin. I think that's how you say her name. Her acting theory was a little radical for me. It was a concept of you're taking a piece of text and you're reading the text, and then you also have a personal narrative of yours, and you're basically reading the text, stopping, adding your personal narrative, reading the text, stopping, adding the personal narrative, until like the tempo of both of those like merge together and basically like create this simpatico feeling. All of a sudden you're immersed. And so I think the concept was to heighten the action of the living of what's happening within the character. I did like her quote that she said that acting is an emergency, and in an emergency you do whatever works. She talked a little bit about what's called a dialectic, that this theory creates this dialectic idea that you have these two opposing things. So you have the character and you have the actor, and all of a sudden you're merging them together to create something, not necessarily opposing, but you're merging, so that you're creating like a truthfulness. So I guess you're taking yourself and you're merging it into the character, which, if I put it in those terms, that's kind of what actors do, is they have some sort of themselves in their characters. I think that's a little bit more completely method, where you're completely going into the character. But it's an interesting concept. I'm not sure that I would do that exercise with a 14-year-old. They might not be ready for that. Another thing she talked about was the Split Britches theater company that Peg Shaw and Lewis Weaver created. I just have to laugh at these two women that came together. First off, I just love this. Weaver studied with Grotowski, which, while Shaw studied with Hot Peaches. They were an all-male gay European theater troupe. I can only imagine the stories that these two women had together to create this theater group. I think that's I think it's great. Their theory was based on what they called multiple choice acting, which is kind of what we do as directors. We might give them little theories here and there. Our actors, here's a concept to be able to use, here's a concept to use, and you have this toolbox that you're creating. And I like the idea that, their philosophy was that each choice taken will change from moment to moment, resulting in consistent engagement as the actor performs. So the idea that maybe in one moment you might use this concept or this tool to create the scene, and then in a different moment or different scene, you would use something else. So it's kind of an interesting concept as well. The last thing she talked about was her reflection on Strasberg's method. I like this, that she says we cannot perform what we do not imagine, and we cannot imagine that which is not within us to be conceived. I kind of believe that that's correct. If we can't imagine our world that we're acting in, it's going to be hard for us to act. That's just students and actors need to know and need to use their imagination to create that. I think another thing she talked about is that acting is ever changing and theories of acting often contradict each other. So I thought that's kind of interesting. And sometimes I think they do, as we're learning through this whole, class, this course, that there are many different theories and different concepts, and not one way is the right way. But she asked us a question at the end here, and it says, can you breathe life into this character or not? And I think that's kind of the quintessential question for every single one of us as actors and directors. Can we get the kids to perform in a truthful, honest way, using whatever tools they choose to use to create that? I think, as long as we're watching our students, making sure that they're using good habits. I'm very worried about mental health. So, taking time to breathe and focus and concentrate. And that's kind of where this, next essay kind of falls into that, about practicing the paradox. Acting is sort of a paradox. You have one aspect, you are the person, and another one, you are the character. And so I am the character, yet I am not the character. I am me. And so you have to tap into your imagination to create the world around you. I think every actor has to do that. That's like part of any sort of theory. How you do that is sort of the method of how you're acting, but creating that imaginary world under whatever circumstances those scenes are is what's going to be important. And is the audience going to believe you? I think sometimes if an idea is not working, if I'm not believing them, I might have to pull that back and go, okay, let's look at it from a different perspective. Let's look at these words that the playwright has from a different perspective. Maybe they're thinking about it this way. Maybe this character is saying it this way, to look at the circumstances of what's happening in the scene. I like also that they said that acting is two-sided action. With relaxation is connected to concentration. So if you're relaxed, you're going to concentrate. And then if you are concentrated, then you're going to do extraordinary action. I really like that. I think being able to teach that to students, they could buy into that concept. Like if you're relaxed and you're being able to focus, you can concentrate, then you could do almost anything. And I using those exercises, and she mentioned Uta Hagen, which I've used a lot of Uta Hagen exercises with my students. In fact, I was taught that in my, several acting classes in college, use several of those exercises. And so getting in touch with your senses, getting in touch with, trying to imagine you're in the woods, with the sun shining on your face, and then all of a sudden it starts to rain. Bringing those aspects into your imaginary world will help. Because, we might not have a full world, especially middle school. We're going to have to use our imaginations to use those things. The last takeaway I want to talk about, and I know I'm getting too long, is the difference between action and tasks. I'm not very good at that. Those are my lights. I'm not very good at that with the director. And I like how they talked about that you have to have little tasks that you are doing that make sense in your character to drive your action forward. And sometimes I forget about making sure that the kids have tasks to do that relate to what's going on in the scene and relate to their character. And I think maybe that will help drive their action forward within the scene itself. So I like the fact that she used that word metaphor, that you're using that metaphor between the tasks and the action. I think young actors will get that concept of doing something, whether it's imaginary or you have the prop to help you as your character fulfill your objective, no matter what that objective is. So kind of some interesting theories and concepts of this week. Anyways, that's kind of all I have. Sorry, I went a little too long today, but all right. I will see you all next week for week 7. All right. Bye.